Hey everybody, this is Meeples on the Ground, and today we're going to talk about Clank Legacy. It's going to be awesome. My character was Cadian.
And mine was Prig Brigand.
And yes, it was a great and awesome time. Now, before we get started, there are going to be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't played it yet and want to play it, I wouldn't really watch this, or if you don't care about the spoilers, if you want to be that one person in the group that knows, I don't think that's the greatest, but again...
There will be lots and lots and lots of spoilers. We're going to show you components, the board, cards, we're going to talk about the storyline, so if you want a spoiler-free experience with Clank Legacy and you haven't played it yet or you haven't finished your campaign yet, maybe come back later.
Yeah. Alright, so the first thing we're going to go ahead and talk about is the overview of the game and our thoughts.
So Clank is one of my all-time favorite games. I really, really love Clank. Seriously, probably in my top 3 favorite games ever. Really, really like Clank a lot. And I love Legacy. Legacy is like my all-time favorite way to play a game. I love Legacy format. So when they announced a Clank Legacy, I was super excited. Super, super, super excited. And I couldn't wait to get my hands on it, and we did, and we started playing. We got it to the table faster and more frequently than almost any other Legacy game we've played. Probably any other Legacy game we've played,
Any other Legacy,
right?
because that was more of 2 players.
Yeah, this one we did have the advantage of just playing with the 2 of us, and it was a disadvantage at some point. We'll talk about that later, but the advantage to actually getting it to the table was that because it was just the 2 of us, we felt like we could do that a lot more easily and a lot more quickly because we didn't have to coordinate schedules with anybody else.
Yeah.
So when we were ready to play a game, we could, and I think that contributed greatly to our overall speed through which we were able to play through the campaign.
Yep, definitely. Alright, so again, Clank Legacy was one of my favorite games, or Clank is one of my favorite games, one of my top 10, and it just was one of my favorite, it probably is my favorite Legacy game right now of all of them.
For sure.
And I can't wait, hopefully, fingers crossed, that there'll be like a season 2.
I hope so.
So that's something exciting to look forward to.
I really feel like they did a phenomenal job incorporating Legacy elements into the game without disrupting the gameplay. A lot of times when you play a Legacy game, there's admin that you have to do because it's a Legacy game. You know, you have to put a sticker somewhere, or you have to add a new rule to the rule book, or add a component or a card or things like that. And sometimes I feel like that can be really interruptive to the immersive experience of the Legacy game. But I feel like for the most part, they did a really fantastic job incorporating those Legacy elements into this version without being too interruptive of that immersive experience. So really appreciative of that, especially because this was a highly, highly thematic experience.
Yep. And with that thematic experience, we liked the story. The story was pretty interesting. We'll get into little bits of the story later. And, you know, parts of it where it was a disadvantage of being a 2-player game. I think was
not too much,
yeah.
Just things we noticed here and there that because we were only playing with 2 players, we didn't feel like we could fully experience quite everything in every game. However, that might be a feeling that you have even if you were playing with max players, which is 4 for this one.
Yeah.
This is a licensed game. It's an Acquisitions Incorporated license over the Clank Legacy mechanics. So Acquisitions Incorporated is a comic book series, I think, a graphic novel series maybe, and like cartoons, and I don't know a whole lot about it because frankly I was not at all interested in Acquisitions Incorporated before we played this, and frankly I'm not at all interested in it now. I think they did a fantastic job using a theme which they could really bring through with the mechanics and the storyline. But it was a little bit heavy-handed in my opinion. I don't really care for the Acquisitions Incorporated theme, and even though it mixed really, really well with the overall vibe of the campaign, sometimes I was just kind of like, okay, I'm so done with this theme. But that wasn't prohibitive to my enjoyment of the game much at all.
Yeah. The gameplay was, again, if you've played Clank, you've played approximately Clank Legacy. There's just things without, like, components that we're going to talk about, cards that come into play, that, again, any kind of version, any expansion that you get of just normal Clank or Clank in Space, things are going to be different. There's going to be different, focuses on each. This one had a little bit of everything. Different focuses. There are cards that made you do specific missions and contracts, so you can go ahead and finish those things. And again, it forces you to, I want to be the employee in Spotlight, and something we'll talk about a little bit later. But that was like something like, okay, I'm not just gonna get the biggest, baddest, artifact that gets me the most points and then just leave.
Yeah.
There were points in the game where, okay, if you don't do this thing, it's a negative effect. But yeah, that's kind of like the overview of what we had of Clank. We can kind of move into now a little bit more of the nitpicky stuff. And so now we're going to move into the board thoughts. So next are board thoughts.
Actually, there's a couple things on top that we could talk about first if you like.
Okay.
So, the game itself came with a lot of really fun, completely unnecessary little extras, which really added to the flavor and the theme of the game. So, again, remember, this is not spoiler-free, so I'm about to show you some stuff. If you don't want to see it, this is your last chance. Turn off the video. So one of the things that they had throughout the game were documents like this, and I'm going to move this out of the way here so I can show you. Documents like this one right here, where it was like this Acquisitions Incorporated letterhead, sorry.
Good.
This Acquisitions Incorporated letterhead, and it was supposed to be sort of like a memo from headquarters, and they were telling us all about the beginning of our adventure. So there was a lot of different things like this. We signed a franchise charter for our particular franchise, which we named Clankdonia. And this was basically like sort of an agreement that we entered into as employees of Acquisitions Incorporated. So very, very fun little thematic ties here and there. Absolutely not necessary, but really added to the immersiveness of the game. We'll come back to one more of those later. In the meantime, we'll show you some of the other stuff that they had in the game. So they had a Book of Secrets. This way, right?
Yep.
All right. So the Book of Secrets is a book of secrets. This was kind of like the story-driven parts of the game. So there would be sort of like that choose-your-own-adventure feel where, you would have to make a decision or carry out an action or something, and it would reference you to a particular
point in the book.
Exactly.
And you go there and then you read it.
And it would sometimes it give you a choice. Sometimes it would just tell you to do certain things. But this was tons and tons of fun stuff. I do have one sort of very, very minor gripe about the game where this Book of Secrets is concerned, and that is that it fell apart. Like, massively fell apart. And it took like 5 or 6 games for it to do this, but that was only half of the campaign.
Yeah.
So by the last half of the campaign, these pages were like, they would like fall on the floor repeatedly as I was trying to flip through the book, or they'd get out of order and then it would be hard to find the passage I was looking for, or that kind of stuff. So not a huge deal, and I could have fixed it, stapled it back together or something like that, but I do feel like that was kind of annoying as we were trying to get through the campaign.
We've also played other Legacy games that we've played longer, and the book would stay together more, all the stuff. So a little annoying, especially for Sarah's part, just because she was the one always reading and going in and out. And anytime she handed it to me, and if it accidentally fell apart, then we'd be picking up. We'd have to pause the game.
Wasn't massively problematic, but it did pull you out of that immersive experience a little bit. They also had a rule book where, at some point Nick had me face it the opposite direction, so now I've just got that in my head that that's the way it's supposed to be. Anyway, they had a rule book, and in the rule book it started out with large sections that were blank, and we added stickers to it, so I don't know if you can tell or not, but like everything from here to here, here to here, These items right here, those are all stickers. So the book started out at blank, and we added these as we went. I really thought they did a fantastic job with presenting the game rules in such a way that you never felt like you were really biting off more than you could chew.
Yeah.
But they also weren't hand-holding to the extent that you're like, come on, can we please pick it up? They did a really nice job balancing, giving you enough to where you felt like it was fresh and it was new, but it wasn't overwhelming. And then they added new bits slowly enough to where you could play through the new mechanics without getting too overwhelmed by all of the new that was being thrown at you.
Yeah, and just like in any Legacy game, there are going to be so many rules that you just forget about. Like, every time we started at a certain point in our Legacy game, we had to do 2 dungeon rows and pick one, and we forgot about that over and over again because it was just something that, we already had a lot going on in the game to always remember and always try not to forget, because there were some nice bonuses.
They also sent along this missions report, which was sort of like your table of contents for each game. So it would tell you for the game that you were playing which side of the board to use, because the board is double-sided. There was an overworld side and an underworld side. So each game they would tell you which side of the board to start on, and then they would tell you to read a passage in the Book of Secrets. And this would tell you kind of like the storyline that game was going to follow, and then it would also give you some instructions for setup for that particular game, and maybe some objectives that we were going to pursue that game or that kind of thing. This is also where we tracked the players' scores, so you can see those scores here. And then each game, an associate, that's what we were in the game, was associates of Acquisitions Incorporated. An associate would earn an associate spotlight in most games, although there were a couple where no one earned that spotlight. And so that placed your name here. And then at the end of the game, you would read another passage, which would sort of wrap up the game. Sometimes, again, you do a little bit of admin that would wrap up the overarching story for that particular game, and that kind of thing. So that was the missions report. We also referenced this at the very, very end of the campaign to sort of wrap up the overall campaign.
There were golden stickers to hand out, and based on who had the highest, lowest winning score, and who got destroyed in the game where they didn't make any points, like you were in the lower half of the dungeon. So it was just very, you got to pay attention to those. When they tell you to write something down, because it will come back later at the end of the game where they're going so who did this, who did that, and then you basically get a nice little certificate at the end that's you're the associate spotlight of the whole entire game, and Sarah won that because she won more gold stars than I did.
It's actually here. I was going to talk about it later, but they presented me with the Employee of the Month, which is this nice little certificate. Again, one of those unnecessary things, but that was cute, and it really added to the overall immersiveness of the experience. So that
kind
was
of like the cherry on top. Okay, here's something for your troubles, or
exactly.
Here's something for just playing the game.
And that was hidden. We had to discover that after we had made it through the entire campaign. So there was also stickers, and there are a lot more stickers than this. Actually, we did throw away sheets whenever they were completely empty. So there was even more than this, but there was quite a few stickers, and they came in this little folder here, and there were stickers for the rules. There were stickers that we added to cards, the board, all kinds of stuff. So there was tons and tons, and we didn't even use them all. So I'm sure that there are things that we didn't actually see throughout the whole campaign. We did see a good majority of it. You'll see how many of these are missing. But there are still obviously some things that we didn't even experience. So lots and lots of stickers. They were high quality. I felt like they were really nice, and there's so many of them. I felt like that was one thing with this game. They really it felt like they spared no expense or effort to provide you with an experience that was really, really immersive and really, really fun. They could have done half this number of stickers, and I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it. But they provided so many nice things like this. And it just, I think to me, it added to the overall fun and interest in the campaign.
I only had a couple gripes about the stickers, where if you misplaced a sticker and you had to take it back off, it curled really badly, so it was kind of like... And some of them didn't always match up, and that's, being a little nitpicky about that. But also, I didn't like putting stickers on the cards. I could feel the stickers, and if they ever bumped, it was just something I didn't personally like, because there was one sticker... one card that had like 5 stickers on it, and it was like every time you shuffled that card, banged up.
And
it was
fun to put the stickers on the card, but they were completely unnecessary. They were just like fun little add-ons, and it did definitely. I think because this is sort of a one-time use thing, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. But if it was something that we were going to play again and again and again, that would probably be kind of subpar.
Yeah.
The stickers will probably get kind of grimy and maybe start to, peel or that kind of thing. Yeah. Are we ready to speak about the board?
Yes. Okay. So let's go ahead and move to the board.
Okay. So there were 2 boards in the game. One of them is this sort of home board, I suppose. Let me pull this one out from over there. So the home board is where we tracked things like our Clank. So if you're familiar with the base game, Clank, this is where all the Clank went. We tracked the Dragon's Rage throughout the game. And these are some stickers that we added here as well, where things would happen at certain rage levels. We also added some rage levels as the campaign went on. We had our marketplace was here, and our health meters were here as well. And then this was supposed to represent sort of like our headquarters. So this was like the place that we would return to at the end of each adventure, the place we'd start out each adventure from. And throughout the campaign, we added different sort of characteristics to our home board. So these were things that we got to do throughout the game. Like Nick was saying earlier, we because we had this quantum weather vane in our headquarters, we could during setup deal 2 adventure rows, and then of those 2 we got to decide which one we wanted to actually start the game with. So these things here changed up the game just a little bit here and there, and there was even more room for more of these, but these were the only ones that we achieved during our campaign. So there was the home board, and then there was also a double-sided board, and I'm not going to open this all the way, but this was the overworld side, and then this was the underworld side. And we added tons of stickers. I don't know if you can tell exactly where the stickers are. They're usually not, even or that kind of thing. But we added tons of stickers. There was a lot of familial elements, like the danger in the tunnels and that kind of thing here, finding, major and minor secrets and that kind of thing. But there was also a lot of new stuff. Like there was a new marketplace item that was a canoe, and you could use the canoe to get through waterways, which you would otherwise not be able to go through.
There's also ones that you could heal yourself with.
Mm-hmm. There was a pickaxe, which would let you get through these. If you didn't have a pickaxe, you could still move along this route, but it would cost a lot more.
Yeah.
It would cost 3 movement, but if you had a pickaxe, it would only cost 1. There were areas of the board where they told us to go to particular story marks in the book. So if you got to this space here, then we would go and we'd read passage 76 in the Book of Secrets. And it would present some kind of choice, or it would further the storyline or that kind of thing. So this was the board. It's a pretty big board. And like I said, it is double-sided. And it had all kinds of extras and fun and that kind of stuff. So that's the board. I don't think that there's anything in particular I want to point out here that we haven't yet.
Nothing much, just adds to it, and the board will change. Like any Legacy game, stickers will be placed. Bigger stickers will overlap other just parts of the board. So now that instead of what it usually does, it does something else. entirely. Like, there was more chances to get rid of cards when you entered certain spaces.
Okay, so that's the board.
And so next we're going to look at the cards. Some of the cards. A lot of the cards are kind of like similar. You have kind of like a basic deck in any Clank game. Some of them will change during on. There are cards called rolls and vault cards. Cards that you start off with and that will give you bonuses throughout the game. If you want, when you pull them out, you can go ahead and give them to me.
Sure.
And then I have one here.
So the game came with all the standard cards, right? The Mysterious Tomes, the Explorers, the Mercenaries, a Goblin, which we're used to having all from the regular Clank, right? But it also came with this Cardporium, which is this lovely little magnetic closure box here, which included tons of cards that we added to the game. And they were everything that Nick was saying. There were new roll cards. There were, let's get some of those basic ones out of here. There were new roll cards. There were new items that we added to the adventure deck. There were event cards, which would come up in the adventure deck. There were just all kinds of stuff. There were a couple of specifically interesting cards, I thought. Some cards we added to our starting deck. So those were the roll cards and cards called vault cards. So the roll cards we were assigned, and we could change out rolls if we wanted to at the beginning of each game. If we wanted a different roll, we could. And we did look into changing out our roll cards a few times, and we did do that a few times, but not often. That's probably one way that we still have some replayability left in this, is that we didn't use a lot of the rolls. But it was neat because they sort of further customized your starting deck, right? They gave you extra fight or movement. Sometimes they would let you heal if you were able to accomplish certain things on your turn. They gave you like some startup money or that kind of thing. So those roll cards were interesting, and because you could choose if you wanted to switch out at the beginning of each game or not, you could really tailor your role for that game to what was sort of expected of you in that particular game. So if you knew that you were going to have to do a lot of fighting in that game, then maybe you could choose a role that was a little bit more sword heavy, right? Or if you thought that you might have to buy a lot of marketplace items, you could do one that added more money to your hand. So there were lots of roll cards to choose from. There were also, what were the
Vaults.
Vault cards. And the vault cards were special cards that you would be dealt, I think, like 3 of at the beginning of the game. And then you would choose of those 3 which ones you want to add to your deck. And they would go to your discard pile, and almost always you had to pay additional Clank to keep them. So you'd get dealt 3. Of those 3, you'd choose the one you wanted to add to your deck. You'd have to pay its Clank cost, its acquire cost, and then it would go to your discard pile. And then the first time you shuffle your deck, it gets shuffled into your deck and it becomes a card that you can draw throughout the rest of the game. And they were usually pretty good. They added significant advantage, but they did cost you that Clank. And the more advantage they cost, the more advantage they gave, typically the more Clank that they cost. So that came in this cute little vault. And we added some of those throughout the game as we played. And this was, again, a nice way to keep each game of the campaign and each individual player deck fresh and interesting and new.
Yep.
So those are some vault cards there. And that's all of the cards we're going to talk about, right?
That's really all the cards. Okay. There's some monsters or some, a lot of trashing happens in this game. I feel more than the basic Clank. We can show you some of the what the box looks like. So this is kind of like what you get, the stars that you get at the end, little goals that you pick, your personal goals, and anytime they'll talk about associated checks, and then every time you pass something, you're reading a passage that actually just helps you more. And then, like we were talking about, the roll cards. So again, you start off with a roll card that starts off shuffled in your deck, and they give you, varying different powers. And each time you start a game, you can go ahead and, start with something new or keep what you have.
So, like Nick was saying, these were sort of our individual player boxes, and they were used to store our unique player decks as well as our personal pieces for the game. They had a little place where we could put the name of our character. We put our gold stars at the end of the campaign on our boxes, and then throughout the campaign there were a couple of different things that we kept track of on our boxes. So each of us had some personal goals that we were attempting to complete over the course of the campaign. There were no timelines or anything like that, no deadlines. We just needed to try to complete them by the end of the campaign. So they again provided some unique direction for each player. And if you completed a particular row of achievements on the back of your goal of your box, then you got to add a check mark of grudging approval, is what they were called, to your status, your associate status on the back of the box. And there were 3 levels. The first was bronze, then silver, and then gold. And each time you hit a new level, you got to read a portion out of the Book of Secrets, and basically sort of get a promotion that would give you different special little things here and there. So these were our friends throughout the entire campaign. There was also a couple of other things. There was our standard dragon bag, right? But it has the new dragon on there. They always do a nice job with those dragon bags. We had a couple of different kinds of components that we played with. We had our dragon cubes. We had these white cubes. They're just standard white cubes. It was spelled strangely in the book, but it was said white, which is a curious little thing. So those were added to the dragon bag when we explored certain spaces on the board called ruins. And when players would pull white cubes out of the dragon bag, every player would suffer a damage, and then the white cube would go back into the dragon bag. So they were kind of intense.
They sped up the game.
They did make it sort of worth it sometimes, though, because if you would go and explore the ruins, you would get bonus rewards and extra stuff that was pretty nice. So sometimes it was I know I'm going to be adding a white cube to the dragon bag, but I'm going to go do this anyway.
But they can kind of help you to get the cards you need, or because at first it's just gold you get, but then we got more special abilities that allowed players to get more fight or more currency to buy cards with.
Yeah, and there were some games in the campaign where it was mandatory for us to go and explore ruins in order to further the storyline, which I thought was interesting. They did a really nice job of push and pull, where they kind of pushed us outside of our comfort a little bit for the sake of the storyline, but not in such a way that you were ever I just don't feel like I can do that, or this is gonna be scary or fun, not fun, or that kind of thing.
There were points in it where, as a 2-player game, it was kind of we cannot finish this because we cannot run across the map, because at the time that it would be revealed to us, we would be okay, well, there's only 2 of us, and we're already half dead, so it's just kind of
So that's probably a good time to talk about the player count, actually. I feel like they didn't really do anything to adjust each game based on the player count, which I appreciate. I kind of don't like it when games do that. I feel like if you can't provide sort of a universal experience for each player count, then there might be some problems with your underlying design. That's not necessarily always true, but I feel like that tends to be true more often than not. So I don't really like it when a game says, well, if you're playing with this number of players, the game is going to change for that number of players than this other number of players. However, because this was sort of an exploratory experience with only 2 players, a few times it did feel like we weren't able to complete the objectives or different plot points in the story or that kind of thing, and it felt like we were being punished for something that was sort of outside of our control.
Yeah.
That being said, we have not played this game with 3 or 4 players, and it might be that way even if we were at max player count.
Yeah.
The last component we're going to talk about are these intern cubes. So the intern cubes were added to the game probably about midway through the campaign, and they were cubes that you could acquire through different means. Sometimes it was cards, sometimes it was like an event or something like that.
Or monsters.
Yeah, different monsters would give you interns. And essentially interns were a personal resource that each player controlled for themselves. And you could use interns to negate damage in tunnels. So if you were going through a dangerous tunnel, instead of taking a damage to your own character, you could sacrifice an intern instead. Sometimes an event would say, if you can sacrifice an intern, then you avoid this bad thing, or you get this benefit, or that kind of thing. And anytime an intern was sacrificed, they would go into the dragon bag, and then the next time they were taken out of the bag, they would be put back in the supply, but no one would take any damage for that. So it was a nice kind of buffer against getting damage too much for each player. There were also tons and tons of tokens. Some of these are going to be familiar, like the major and minor secrets, and the marketplace items that we're all familiar with, as well as like the artifacts and stuff like that. Some of them are new. They had nice little pieces which would help you to remember if there was a certain story point that you needed to get to. So like they would say, oh, if you reach the forest in the southeast corner of the map, you need to read this particular passage in the Book of Secrets. So they gave us just a few of these book tokens so that you could place those out on the board, so that it just kind of gave you a visual reminder, oh hey, when we get here we need to do that, which was nice. There was also some new types of pieces like these here. These are pieces, they one on the right there is a seal of approval, I think is what it was called.
Yep.
And those were throughout the game in various forms. So that one is in the form of a major secret. However, they were sometimes on the cards. There were stickers that we added to the cards. Sometimes they were things you could pick up around the board. But they were essentially worth some points, sometimes on their own, but also in sets of 3. So for every 3 seals of approval that you had, you could earn another 10 points for that game. And that was interesting because it was sort of mix and match between the components and the cards, and I liked that. I thought that was cool. There was also we've talked about some new marketplace items like the canoe and the amulet of health. I'm not sure if that's what it's really called, but that's what it does. There were some new dragon's eggs. So these functioned like the dragon's eggs that we're familiar with from the base game, but in addition to increasing the rage tracker, they would also put 3 black cubes back in the bag. Something like that. I don't entirely remember what that did. So there was all kinds of familiar tokens. There were some new tokens. Do you want to talk about any more of these? Oh, we didn't really talk about the... what were these guys called?
Dran agents. The
Dran agents, that's right. So we were from a corporation called Acquisitions Incorporated, and we had sort of like a competition going with a rival corporation called Dran Enterprises. And these little guys here were Dran agents that were stationed around the board, and if you stepped into their space, either you would take a damage or you'd have to spend 2 fight to defeat them, and if you defeated them, they would give you some kind of bonus. So that one in particular would give you a intern, and it would let you trash a card from your deck. So those were neat. They were things that sometimes we could interact with by choice if we wanted to, but sometimes we were directed to by the game as well. So there were lots of different things. Like I said, some of this is pretty familiar to us, some of it is new, but lots of different components here. I think we're going to move on from this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we already talked about story a little bit. it was kind of confusing not knowing kind of like the web series.
I don't think we needed to know anything going in, but it was a little heavy-handed.
Yeah. And that's really all we have about the story. The story was fine, other in the game, but it was kind of like Acquisitions Incorporated again. It's kind of like like that's cool.
So there were a couple more components we wanted to show you. These are our little character sculpts. They're pretty nice, especially because this is a consumable game. So at some point you extinguish this game's lifespan, essentially. So to have these nice 3D sculpts that were included in a game with an expiration date was pretty nice. And I've seen some lovely pictures of people who have painted their figures and done some really nice work. So the 3D sculpts are nice. There is a way for you to continue playing through games of Acquisitions Incorporated if you want to, even after the campaign wraps up. However, we're probably only going to play a few of those, maybe 2 or 3, just kind of
some
finish
cards
out.
we haven't played that we want to play with.
Yeah, finish out some of the things we weren't able to complete during the campaign. But then after that, I think we're probably done with at least this copy of the game. Yeah. That being said, we'll stick the little figures around on the shelves as a cute little reminder of the campaign. But after that, like there's, or maybe somebody will use them in a D&D campaign or something like that.
Yeah.
The last component was this filing cabinet. And the filing cabinet was where we sort of stored different things in between games. So we had different cards. We had these contract cards where in a particular game we would get these out of the cardporium. The Book of Secrets would tell us to get certain cards out of the cardporium, and these would become contracts that we would attempt to complete. Sometimes they lasted from game to game. If we hadn't completed one, we could carry it over to the next game, that kind of thing. Sometimes it said, if you haven't completed this by the end of game, 4 or whatever, then you have to destroy it. These were fun. I really liked the contracts. I thought that they added some interesting individual game progression.
Yeah. Forces you to play outside of what you usually do sometimes.
There were more rolls, and there were also these necrosis cards, which you would get in your deck if you died. So, because this was a campaign game, if you died in a game, then as a effect for the campaign itself, the next game you would start with a necrosis card in your deck, among other small things here and there. And then if you were not able to get the necrosis card out of your deck by the end of the game, you would lose 10 points. I thought it was a nice way to handle sort of game-to-game death in the campaign, because it made it feel lasting enough so that you were like, okay, well, this makes sense in the course of the overarching story, right? I died in game 4, so in game 5, there are repercussions from that. But it wasn't so bad that it felt unfair or crippling, because even though this card is worth negative 10 points, if you can't get it out of your deck by the end of the game, it's actually kind of a nice card. It gives you 1 blue diamond money to buy with, and then it gives you 2 fight. And the only thing you need to do to be able to actually get it out of your deck is if you have this in your hand and you heal, then you can trash the card. So, like I said, it provided a nice sort of feeling of, something with real weight behind it, but not crushing weight. And that was really nice. The last thing we'll talk about are these patron cards. The patron cards were cards that were referenced, again, in the Book of Secrets most of the time during the setup of the game. They would tell us to get a particular patron from a folder. They came in a folder similar to the sticker folder, but it was small. And they would tell us to get a particular patron out of the patrons folder and use it for that game. Now, we didn't have a patron for every game. But there are 13 of these patrons here. We didn't get to play with all of them, but we did get to play with most of them.
Yep.
They would have a particular setup parameter. Then they would also have something that would happen at the end of the game and something that would happen about midway through the game. And so each of these would affect that particular game thematically and mechanically in some way. And again, this was just one of those points where they did a really nice job introducing some new mechanics to keep things fun and fresh, but not in a way that was overwhelming. I also felt like they did a really fantastic job helping us to remember all of this stuff. So the thing that we had to do in the middle of every game, it was marked with this seal right here. And we could remember that that needed to happen because on the rage track, there was a sticker that we added to the rage track. And when the dragon stepped onto that space, we knew to trigger this particular thing. So they did a really nice job with providing some subtle but useful visual cues, which served as really nice reminders for things that we needed to do throughout the game.
Yeah.
I feel like we've played several Legacy games at this point, and I feel like there's almost always, by especially like when you're about 70 or 80% of the way through the campaign, there's always so much going on that sometimes it can be hard to keep track of everything or remember everything that you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it. But I feel like for the most part, Clank Legacy did a fantastic job of providing those subtle but helpful reminders as to what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, and like I said previously in this review, not throwing so much at you at once that you were overwhelmed or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is all the components. I think we've talked about just about everything we wanted to talk about in the game.
Yep.
What else do we need to say?
Just need to go about our final thoughts. Would you
Okay.
recommend this game? What are things that you are, hesitant or things that you're excited about to recommend to people? Just things that maybe you didn't cover during it. Things that we want to talk about. Oh, yeah.
So, like I said when we started, Clank is one of my favorite games of all time, and I love, love, love playing Legacy games. Love it. I think that this was a really fun implementation of the mechanics and sort of the feel of Clank into a Legacy game. And I think they did a really nice job creating an immersive, fun, and new experience for even seasoned Clank players. I think the production quality is fantastic. They provided so many things in this box. So many things that I really feel like for the money that we spent, the value is through the roof.
Yeah.
It was $100
Yeah.
to get this game, but there's definitely $100 worth of stuff here. I do think if you break it down based on the cost per game, we played 11 games, so this was approximately a little less than $10 a game. I think breaking it down like that, I think it's maybe not something I would want to pay to do again, but I wouldn't be hard to convince to do it again either, even having to pay $100 to get a new copy of the game.
Yeah.
Like I said, I really feel like the value is absolutely here. They really provided above and beyond what they needed to make this fun and immersive, fresh, exciting, new, interesting. I really think they did a fantastic job with the value that they've provided here.
Agreed.
I think that the campaign was fun and interesting. I do think, like we've mentioned a couple of times, the Acquisitions Incorporated theme isn't one that we particularly care about. And it was a little at some point, or at some points throughout the campaign, I was just kind of like, okay, can we please move past this like bureaucratic slog fest? And that sounds much harsher than I actually felt about it at the time, but I'm not big on bureaucracy anyway, and sometimes they tried to play it as like, haha, isn't that funny? And I'd be like, not really, I don't think that's funny. But I also understand that the acquisitions incorporated sort of the graphic novels and stuff like that. They are sort of a particular sense of humor. So if you don't share that sense of humor, it's probably not
the greatest thing.
Yeah, not like the kind of humor that you would like. That being said, it was absolutely family friendly for the most part. You know, there are a couple of like wink wink type jokes here and there, but like totally family friendly. Not like you know,
nothing crass.
Yeah, no crass humor, nothing like that. Just humor that's not exactly my thing.
Could play with, you know, really anybody and not be embarrassed if something comes up.
Absolutely.
So sorry about that one.
I think that, like I said, it wouldn't be that hard to convince me to play this again, especially if we played maybe a 4-player game.
Yeah, I think 4-player would be like kind of the better of the two. If you told me a 3 or 4-player, I'd want a 4-player because I feel like I'd get more of a different outcome.
Yeah.
But if you told me, you know, I was saying maybe do it each one, but then like we said, it's $100, so you're paying each time, whether it's the whole game or you split it up with your game group. That's still a good bit of money.
Yeah.
And not everyone can just be like, wow.
Yeah. And I also think, having experienced the campaign, it was fun, exciting, really cool. I liked it. But there are so many games out there. Maybe let's move on and play something new.
Yes. All right. So that was our final thoughts and our overview of what we thought of Clank Legacy. What is some of your favorite Legacy games? Are you hoping for a encore, a season 2? What do you think that would look like?
I'm hoping for an encore.
I wonder if they'll do like the Clank in space and kind of do like a pirate space theme.
That would be kind of fun. Clank in space is not my favorite in the Clank universe. I think that mechanically it is superior if you just take base game Clank and base game Clank in space. I think mechanically in space is better, which I hate to say because I actually prefer Clank. Just the regular Clank. I like the theme better. I like the artwork better, stuff like that. So I think a Clank in Space Legacy would be I don't know, sort of
maybe like
an understandable next step. You know, it would make sense that they would do Clank in Space Legacy. But I would be perfectly happy if they did just like a regular Clank Legacy Season 2 as well. That would be...
Maybe bring out the Ape Lords more, or maybe cool. The spiders.
Yeah, the like Spider Queen.
Or maybe even like push out the cursed one even more and bring that out. And be like less of a corporation, but more of like, you know, glory and you're an explorer. But hey, it's, you know, you can go in any direction. Like
I said when we started this, I'm so excited that they came out with a Clank Legacy. Before they did, I was actually speaking with a friend of mine about how we could sort of jerry-rig our own Clank Legacy. If, you know, like, okay, if we play this expansion and then we, like, cycle that right into this expansion, and maybe you could take, like, 1 or 2 of the major secrets you've earned from, like, this one and carry them into that one. So we had been talking about jerry-rigging together our own sort of Clank Legacy before they came out with this. And I'm pleased with what they've come out with, but it would be kind of fun if they did one that was a little bit more sort of like pulp action adventure without a license. Because I think they've done a fantastic job with all of the Clank expansions, and there is some fun stuff I feel like we could incorporate into a Legacy version that could be really neat and really interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, this was Meeples on the Ground. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.